So I thought I'd do a video, a little discussion about, or I want to start a series about different presentations and the way I do things, right? So if you've watched any videos, which many people don't do, I get this, I got like 5 subscribers, whatever. Mental health, remember? So one of the things you see me do is I throw jigs, right? It's my jam. It's what I like to do. I like the versatility. Honestly, that's my answer to that is I like the versatility. I like what it provides. I like what it allows me to do. I appreciate the way I'm able to pick apart a given area of water, right? If I'm looking at a pocket, using something like this allows me to do that. Do I do other things? Of course. I mean, we all do different things, right? I think we all have our favorite things. So with that said, this is my favorite thing. So what am I using? So when we talk about what I'm using, go-to right here is what you're seeing in front of me. So Bitsy bug jigs, right? Cheap, fairly well put together. They last. $1.70 something. I mean, they're a little bit rangy. $1.50 something to use, about $1.80 usually, but 3/16 and below is typically what I like to use. I'm a small presentation guy. I mean, sometimes I'll go larger depending on conditions, but I'm typically I'm doing it small. I'm doing it finesse. It's just the way I prefer to do it that way. Some people prefer to crank, some people prefer to do other things. I prefer to throw jigs, even small swim baits. I like the small Ned rigs, stuff like that. But so with that said, I've already established 3/16. What I have in front of me are the 4 collars that I typically like to use. Do I use other things? Of course, I got some, like some larger ones in this. I typically throw something like this in the spring. Back that up with even a grub or a fluke, and I'll pull it off the bank. Those lighter collars, or if collar permits, water collar. So, but I typically find what we have here in front of me is this is the collar selection that works. Variety conditions, and really any of them can work in a lot of different conditions. Sometimes it's feel for me. Sometimes I'll find a collar that's working better. I mean, it's the same with any bait, right? So I have, kind of like from a dark, a little less, right? Little less, and a little less. We try to match them up with patterns, whatever color. What am I seeing in the water? That sometimes, what do I need to do? Do I need to be dark? So this one I believe is called Camouflage. 3/16 Bitsy bug. I believe this is Camouflage. This color actually is Watermelon. I use this a lot. This is matches depending on your trailer that you're going to use, and we'll talk about that in a second. It matches really well with typically what you see on the river bottom. I think this is pumpkin. I'm almost positive this is pumpkin. I might be wrong on that. Might be wrong. Fairly certain that this is pumpkin. This is green pumpkin. I caught the 19 the other day using a green pumpkin. But again, 3/16 and below, that's my jam. It's also, I think that's probably because of the way I fish and the gear I use. I prefer a lighter jig. Once I get above this range, and even this jig, depending on what rod, like my 6.6 Croy, I can feel these. It's so whippy on the tip that I prefer actually the ones down, which I think are, I don't know, I'll have to look at that one, but I prefer those to be down. So I've got my jigs, right? $1.70, let's say a pop. What am I backing it with? Well, that's dependent upon what I'm trying to do, right? Most of the time it's either some kind of crayfish imitation or some kind of creature bait, beaver tail, something in that general kind of context and range. And when I'm talking about that, obviously I'm not using this on it, but it would be something like that. I typically put this on a larger jig, right? Big swim jig. But so we're going to go there. Let's talk about crawls and creatures. So these are some of those things that fit that bill, right? And these are things that, why they out here, because this is what I have on. I mean, 99% of the time, if I am in this type of presentation, I'm using one of these things. It's just price-wise, they make me happy. Performance-wise, especially the NetBaits, I like those. Those are my, if you ever heard me say Lieutenant Dan's, NetBaits are my Lieutenant Dan's. Cremes, cheap, easy. Every once in a while, this wanky janky weird ass stick kind of presentation paired on that Bitsy. Gets it done. Obviously, they need to be feeding larger because it's kind of long once you pair it up behind one of that, right? But, I can trim these down. I do that a lot, too. We're going to talk about something else I do and where I trim these things, or I trim the plastic down. I don't use these a lot. I use these kind of in the springtime. This is a good springtime presentation. You drag that across, especially if you're a bed fisherman, which I'm not. But sometimes they're out there, right? You want to hit those beds without even seeing them, depending on what the water conditions are. But these are really good in the springtime. So most generally, though, I'm on the Lieutenant Dan's. These NetBaits, so the Paca chunks are the Paca chunk minis, I believe, and these are Alabama crawl, again, watermelon. They kind of have the same collar packages that kind of match those jigs, honestly. But I find that these chunks are almost just the perfect size when I'm backing these up. Strike King's another one I'll use, but you can get them bigger. They have the senior, which is a bigger, and really the body profile is not much larger, but the actual claws themselves are fairly significantly bigger. It's a larger presentation. I find typically what I get there is a lot of short hits. They're hitting the bottom end of it. So I go with this, more positive hookups on the size. Could be a mind thing, but it works for me. Again, fishing, a lot of it's what am I comfortable with? And those comfort things allow you to be more effective on the water, I think. So again, NetBaits, Paca chunks. My go-to right here. This is what I prefer to use. I also like these. Not obviously you see this down here. I was using this the other day, but these are their Paca Craws. Great little baits too. I've caught a lot of fish with these. If I get it out of here. Slightly different. It's kind of a buoyant body. You can kind of see that, right? It's airy. It's hollow. So you can jig in through this way, and there's multiple ways to rig these with the hook coming out the mouth. On those Bitsies, I usually just run them up through, and then usually protrudes right about there, if you can see that. There's where I protrude that hook. And then something I'm doing on all these is hold on, let me set this down. So one of the things that's good to have, it doesn't have to be this stuff, right? The brush on fishing glue. They just happen to have this when I needed some, and that's what I bought. And it's leaked out, obviously, but crazy glue, anything like this, and you can refill this with a bigger bottle of crazy glue. But it's a little brush in there. It's kind of hard. I'm gonna open it up. I don't get on everything, but I run that on my jig heads, right? So this, for example, as I'm putting on that plastic, I'm marrying the two together. You strip back that, and I'm running some glue around that. And I do that the same thing with like my Ned rigs. I run a little seam of glue this, put them down there, and when it does, it holds that. It allows your plastic to have this elasticity, but it keeps it locked on fairly well. This is waterproof, whatever that means, but it keeps them engaged fairly well. And as long as you're not losing, and that's typically not where you have the problems. You typically lose Lieutenant Dan loses his legs. You've heard me say that, right? You start losing those crawls. So we'll talk about the Strike Kings. Something else, I use these a lot, just simply because they're cheap, and this little profile works fairly well behind these bugs. I mean, you can see the collar match, it's good. And then a lot of times I'm not even worried about matching collars. I'll throw that behind that. I'll pair it behind any of these combinations. With this presentation, I will. Obviously, I like to pair the Alabama crawl behind that. Just if I'm looking for if I'm trying to match specifically what's going on in the water, I'll be a little bit more cognizant of trailers to the actual skirts, right? Because that's all that is. The skirt comes on and off. But most of the time, I'm just pretty arbitrary, man. It's one of those things I found that it's not real picky. You don't have to do that. But again, if I'm creature, do I do other things? And do I back up with, oh, hell yeah. I mean, I have other things I put on. I think we all do. Primary go-tos, like I said, if I'm creature or crawling, I got these in my pocket because I typically run those plastics down in my pocket. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to talk about something else I do with them before we even get into actual what am I doing as far as presenting and how I work it, because I do that a lot differently than some people do, I think, as well. But so The old Finesse TRDs, right? We all use these. Jigs are on the little Ned rigs, right? I'll back them up to that too. Right there. Back them up. Stick them on stick bait. Just run the body on there. And I will fix that just like a jig I would anything else, or I'll swim them. A lot of times I'll swim them. So if I'm not using this, which is a smaller one, right? Smaller presentation. You know, I'll step up to the yums. These dingers, man, and I'll run these dingers in all kinds of colors. I'll either run them full profile, which, I mean, that's kind of weird, right? It's a lot of rubber back there behind that hook. So I'll do that in certain situations. If I'm thinking that larger profile, and typically I'll go up on the jig at that point. But typically what I'm doing here is I'm cutting these. And then at that point, you can use them either way. But I like to use the bottom, the lower section, where it's, if you can see that it has a profile, right? Typically use it from here back. Usually about where you get that, your worm hook, right? Your wider berth right there. I'll cut it and use that piece. So, you know, 2.5 section of it. And again, what am I doing with these? Creativity, you can do a whole lot of different things, but typically I'm tossing those out and I'm swimming them, popping them, ripping them across current, or hopping it. And what happens, that tail back there behind that jig, you know, it's the jig's falling, you got your skirt, it's, you know, as it's pulsating and articulating, you got that thing back there and it's, you know, it's just doing that. And it doesn't have a lot of movement, but it's, you'd be surprised how many strikes you pick up, or just dragging it with that. So again, this was kind of want to cover the what's. This is what I'm tossing. This is what I'm backing it up with. And again, do I back up with other variations? Of course, I do. But I mean, I could be here all day. When it comes to a jig, if I think it's going to work, I've tried it. Like I said, I'll put grubs on these, stick baits. Man, I've used the end of, you know, rooster tail longworms. It doesn't matter. I've thrown anything on the back of a jig and make it work. Sometimes, push comes to shove, it's just going skirt, it's going legless. So again, what works, when and how, a lot of times it's situational. But you're going to be damn certain that at some point in that day, I have this tied on and I'm working the living snot out of it. If I don't work it in every hole, sometimes I do that. If I'm two-fisting out there and I'm fishing, when I'm two-fisting, that means I'm carrying a spinning rod and I'm carrying a casting rod. I will try to have this on the the spinning rod, and then on the casting rod, it's typically something heavier. It's not a big casting rod, but I mean, I might be throwing something like this. I mean, obviously I haven't opened this one yet, but it's a replacement. Not the color I wanted, but trust the smallies with the size XPS, freaking double down, man. Said bones, probably my color, but like, that's how I'm doing it. Two ends of the spectrum, and then either I'm ripping between a jig or usually a little swim bait over here. I want some cranking. You know, if I'm throwing small crankbaits or something, which I do every once in a while, it's a different realm. Different day, we'll talk about that. But my jam is a jig. That's what Brian does. That's what I prefer to do. And that's what I'm doing. So if there's a bite, I can fish this some way, somehow, and engage that fish, typically, in whatever hole. It's just as long as it's not too murky, too fast, right? I mean, you have those problems. This weight jig, yeah, I mean, you could have some issues with some flow, getting it down. Because I fish them in flow. How do you fish them in flow? Well, we'll talk about all the hows and what I'm doing and how I present. We'll probably tie that as a tandem, and I'll probably want to speak over some video that I do. But now you've seen it. These go-to colors, and I'll have all this down in the description. This is how I roll. And again, depending on watercolor, what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to imitate, and what the fish are telling me. Always an important factor to remember what those fish are telling you. Listen to them and let them tell you which direction to go. And once you learn to be able to do those things, your fishing experience will improve dramatically, I think. Some days you can't figure it out, but you know, most of the days, if you just take the time to pay attention to what's going on around you, and like I said, pay attention to how those fish are biting when they are biting. Pay attention to how they're contacting the bait, what you're doing when they're contacting the bait. Those two things are really key. How are they contacting the bait? What's that tell you? Are they being really aggressive? Is it light? Are they picking up? Are they just stealing it from you? Or what are you doing? Are you dragging it? Are you dead sticking it? I mean, that's a thing. I will throw these out there and just, they go to the bottom, and you know, once it's there, I might move it once. Just an initial off, right? And then I let it set and let it set and let it set. Sometimes for quite a while, if it's like cold or the bite is just really static. Just to see, because they're looking at it a lot of time. I mean, if you've done your right thing, if you've done your homework, and I mean, that's how you're catching a fish, let's be honest. You're recognizing what's going on within the environment around you. You're seeing the water, and you recognize those key characteristics that tend to hold fish. That's a term that we need to recognize. They tend to hold fish, right? And learning those things, that's the first thing. And we could talk about what those are and how those are and what's going on around you in the water or the land. It could be the environment, what you're doing, how you're doing it, the direction you're doing it from. You can have 15 fish in that pool, and if they don't see it, or you don't see it in the manner that they want to see it, they're not biting it. It's just the way it is, right? And until you figure that out, you'll catch fish. We all do. You know, a lot of catching fish is luck. I mean, I'm not beyond saying that. You toss, putting that bait in the right presentation, in the right area, is a little bit of luck. It's an educated guess, right? You improve the luck with what? Paying attention to what you're doing. And that's what I tell my son all the time is be cognizant of what you're doing. Think about what you're doing. That's why I don't like him. I told him I don't like you in pools in front of me. And it's not because I don't want my kid catching fish. And I hope he understands that. And I tell him, it's not because I don't want you to catch fish. I want to catch fish. And that's not the context that I want to catch the fish that he can catch. I want the hole to be good. And it's just, we approach it differently. And like I said, like if you start one end and go to the other, and preserving potential other pockets in that area, just for the simple fact that you think about how you're going to hook the fish and where he's probably going to run. You got to think about all those things. He doesn't do that. But he'll learn. But it's that context. There's very specific things. And when you start putting all that together and doing the right things at the right time, that's when this selection and kind of how you can tailor, in my opinion, the finesse game, right? Because that's what it's coming down to, is that finesse game. Bitsy bugs, 316 and down is getting fairly small. We could talk about small jigs and Ned rigs and things like hair jigs. It's a fun game to play, in my opinion. A good jig bite is almost as good as a top water bite to me, depending on how it's going on. If it's a chess match between you, because sometimes you can get ticky-tack with some of these fish if they're not getting into that metal. And we've talked about that, or I will. The context, and let's look at that jig right now. So some of the things you got to think about a jig. With most of these Bitsy bugs, depending on what they are, they overdo this significantly. It's probably where I'm going to start making my own. So I usually trim these back, or I think I've talked about that. I'll get them down to a few. You don't need them all. I like to have a little bit of guard there, but not much. I don't want anything to interrupt this getting home. And this can sometimes, depending on how you are. If you got too much, sometimes when you're doing this, you got a lot of slack line you're trying to deal with and take up. So give myself a better chance. I trim these down. I do. So we've established the turnout. Now you got to think about what you're doing when you're jigging. You are presenting a fairly hard item, right? That's a jig. We hear all that. Even when paired with one of these bodies, the only soft material is that body, right? So other baits, yeah, hard baits are the same way, but the thing with those is they're grabbing and they're getting hook all over them. This, you have one point, but the key piece that you kind of got to remember with this is they get that very quickly right there, that presented, and they pick that up. That's right in the roof of their mouth very quickly. So they don't tend to hold on to jigs very long, and it's usually either it's getting hammered like just a straight freight train, or they're picking it up and swiping it. And if you ever watched a fish, it's kind of a clumsy dance a lot of times when people think they're just coming in and boof, and that happens. Sometimes it's boom, and when that happens. It's very sudden, it's very abrupt, and it's always solid. It's solid and going away, or solid, or it's there. But most of the time they're fumbling. They're trying to suck it, and you'll feel it jiggle, and they'll drop it. Sometimes they'll come back, but this thing, once they get it in their mouth, if you're not doing your part and putting that in there, very quickly. When they feel that, they're spitting it. So things to remember, keep them clean. I do that with all my Bitsies. I go light. This is heavier. I think this is a 1/4 ounce. Again, I use this in the spring, or if I need something bigger, throw in a bigger body. And next part, we'll talk about how we do it. All right, transition.